Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we are playing a little bit of Underempire versus Overempire. We are playing as the filthy rats, the man-sized vermin from the sewers of the Empire cities, playing against a great crusade led by Volkmar the Grim over here, and who's brought along all the bells and whistles. Got the Tattersouls, got his flagellants, he's got the Hammer of the Witches, he's on his Volkswagen, and he's even brought 2 units of Knights of the Blazing Sun. So definitely going all out on the crusade build, trying to purge these vermin from the Empire's lands. So here we are on the map Karak Azgal, and for my composition I did decide to run Lord Skrull, just a very solid Lord pick I think overall. He's one of the, obviously I think most of the Skaven Lords are really decent as long as you know what you want to use them for and what you intend for them to do. I did of course bring Plague Rash, just the debuff that he gets when he casts spells, Aura of Pestilence, -5 melee attack around him. I think this is a solid debuff. It's just good. Empire troops don't have the best of stats to begin with, so if you can debuff them a bit, it's nice. Pestilent Breath. Empire has a lot of squishy infantry. Pestilent Breath does well against them. Then plus with Filth, which is a poison, imbues poison on all your troops within an AoE, and it's rather powerful. It can definitely make your troops trade very efficiently, or much more efficiently than they would normally. And if you overcast it for 8 winds of magic, it doubles the effect duration to 44 seconds, which is a very cheap and very effective spell. Then I did bring Vermintide, which allows me to spawn clan rats behind my opponent's lines. Once again, very cheap and very effective. I also did bring Stand Your Ground, of course, a Rod of Corruption for that AoE damage, and then Liber Boanicus for single target damage. So basically all the bells and whistles on Lord Skrull, just missing out on a few of the higher end, more expensive spells on him. Alongside him, I did bring a Plague Priest on a Plague Furnace. Now you might think big nasty sort of transports and monsters like vehicles and monsters like this are not particularly great against Empire, but I do actually think the Plague Priest can be decent because he has a lot of mass. He can just kind of barge through infantry lines. The Empire can't be dealing with everything at once. He has a Pestilent Breath, which actually allows him to deal with squishy infantry on a low cooldown for free, pretty effectively. He does cause constant AoE damage. He does good damage against infantry. He's got a bonus versus infantry even. He causes Contaminated, which is a great leadership debuff of -10. And he's even got some missile resistance, stacked on top of 100 armor. So especially if your opponent brings Free Company Militia or crossbowman, he can actually be pretty tanky. Alongside that, I did bring a Warlock Engineer. This is basically the poor man's Plague Priest stripped down. He does have Warpstone armor. If he's in melee, he's doing damage to all the troops around him. He's got armor piercing, pretty pitiful melee stats, but basically he's just a vessel bringing in Warpstone armor. And otherwise, he's a pretty bad lord. Without his spells, there's not much he can do, but that Warpstone armor makes it all worth it. My front line is composed entirely of Plague Monks. We do have a single unit of Plague Monk Sensor Bearers here in the center. They're there for their armor piercing, to deal with enemy greatswords, that sort of stuff. Obviously, they also have Contaminate, so they can debuff my opponent's morale, that sort of stuff. And all Plague Monks do have a little bit of additional survivability thanks to physical resistance. Plague Monk Sensor Bearers are rather expensive, but I do believe they'll trade pretty efficiently with greatswords, especially if we buff them with poison. Otherwise, normal Plague Monks, which beat up basically every Empire infantry unit except great swords. Behind them, we do have some Rat Ogres for additional armor piercing, as well as a Helpit Abomination on the other end. And the Helpit Abomination, not the best of armor, but it has a huge HP pool. It does have a pretty awesome ability here, and it's too horrible to die. So when its hit points are below 10%, there's a chance of the unit instantly dying, which isn't great. But there's also a chance of the unit gaining hit points. And it's actually a huge buff to hit points. It makes the unit very hard to kill. It also has a little bit of missile resistance, and the main thing is that huge HP pool and the very powerful melee attacks with a bonus against large. So this can help me against Demigryph Knights or against Knights of the Blazing Sun, as we'll see here, and all that sort of stuff. Finally, a small missile line here of Knight Runners and Gutter Runners with slings. These guys can of course trade pretty well with Empire shooting of all sorts thanks to their physical resistance. They apply poison. They're a decent support unit. For my opponent, he did bring a front, of course, Volkmar on his Volkswagen, and Volkmar, it does get for free cast of Banishment. He gets Grand Soulfire around him, Grand Shield of Faith, all these buffs, and he gets Jade Griffin, which allows him to replenish. Plus, he's unbreakable when he's on his Volkswagen, and he does cause Fear and Terror, which could be a problem for the Skaven, who are susceptible to that stuff. Though the Plague Monks actually have Frenzy, so they're not that susceptible to it. They're immune to Psychology, at least for a little bit. In his front line, my opponent does have a mix of greatswords and flagellants, providing him with some good staying power, something to deal with cheap, squishy infantry in the form of the Tattersouls and the flagellants, and then something to deal with either storm vermin or just tank through Plague Monks in the form of the greatswords. Behind that, he does have the Hammer of the Witches just to poke away at me and definitely pick off at my poor Hell Pit Abomination here, which is going to have a rough time. The Hammer of Witches, of course, does magical damage and, more importantly, is a very high weapon strength. It used to be a bonus against large, but it's actually just been changed to having monstrous weapon strength overall, which is pretty crazy. Behind that, single unit Spearman with shield just to provide some support. 2 units of Knights of the Blazing Sun on the flanks. Against Skaven, you don't need the best of cavalry, and these guys can probably do an okay job against, say, Doom Wheels or something like that. They have very high melee attack, decent armor, actually pretty good armor, decent weapon strength, and great charge bonus. They're the most shock-oriented of the shock cavalry in that Empire roster. Then finally, my opponent does have Stillman's Revenge and Free Company Militia on the back, providing fire support. It's not going too heavy into the fire support, but definitely having a decent contingent there. I immediately open fire on the Tattersalls. They're unshielded, have 0 armor, have no missile resistance, none of that, so I'm simply going to start whittling away at them. You can see they're being poisoned. Unfortunately, some of my slingers decide to waste ammo on greatswords. Slingers have really, really bad armor piercing, so I'd prefer not to waste them on something like greatswords. See, my opponent sallies out with his Knights of the Blazing Sun, and my troops scurry away like the rats they are. Over here, the Hell Pit Abomination has already lost 1,200 HP to the fire from the cannon. And my opponent does decide to think better of it and backs off with his Knights of the Blazing Sun. I was ready to dive in with the Rat Ogres if needed, and fortunately, though, he did retreat. Over here, the poor Hell Pit Abomination is still getting pounded, but I'm trying to get into the Knights of the Blazing Sun, negating their charge bonus, and of course, taking advantage of his huge bonus against large. And it just tried to charge. You can see it's kind of limping along, waddling along. The Flagellants are immediately getting smashed into by the Plague Priest. The Plague Priest has 100 armor, so normal Free Company is not going to do very much to it. And now you can see the Plague Monks are collapsing on the Flagellants, and they're tearing through them. The Flagellants didn't get their charge bonus off, which is a huge problem for my opponent, and they're getting shredded very, very quickly. Censer Bear's in the center here, slugging out with great swords and doing a pretty good job of it at that. And of course, with Lord Skrulk in the mix, they're going to die very quickly. Sterling's Revenge getting smushed by mass fire from the Angry Night Runners. And with all those HP drains, as you can see, my opponent's HP is actually dropping rather quickly on all these squishy units. Over here, the Hell Pit Abomination is tied down with the Knights of the Blazing Sun, but it's already knocked off several models. So over here, you can see they're down by 9 models already. And over here, the Plague Priest is trying to just kind of rampage around, hit the Hammer of the Witches, just trying to tie down as many units as he possibly can, and doing a pretty good job of it. And when he's in melee, he is of course draining the HP on all of these troops with the constant billowing death. My opponent does drop a banishment on my Night Runners with slings, which of course is going to rake in a huge amount of kills for Volkmar. Volkmar is up to 40 kills almost, but he is being hit by Lieber Bonicus himself, which, while he does have regen, is going to do some damage to him. Plague Monks in the meantime are shredding through these Flagellants, beating them down rather quickly, and even the Greatswords are actually not having the best of time of it, because thanks to the support for the Plague Monks, they're doing an okay job. You can see a Grand Soulfire does go down, which does quite a bit of damage there. And now my Night Runners and Gutter Runners are focusing down Volkmar with their slings. He does have pretty good armor on the Volkswagen at 100. It used to be, I do believe, lower. I do believe it used to be 50. So definitely it is more of a problem. Unfortunately, I do a bit of a miscast here with a Breath spell. And it is just shy of hitting the Free Company Militia. I was trying to get the apex of the hit, and I misjudged a little bit. Great Swords do get hit by Terror, though, and they rout, and they're just going to be fleeing for quite a bit. And my opponent does try to charge in with Knights of the Blazing Sun, but that's not the greatest exchange with the Hell Pit Abomination. It doesn't have great weapon strength or melee attack. And of course, right now it's actually being poisoned by friendly fire from the Slingers, but it does have a bonus against large. It's going to hit pretty hard. In the meantime, my Plague Priest is still rampaging around, doing quite a bit of work, being a general nuisance. And of course, my opponent doesn't have much armor piercing, so he's going to struggle against that. Over here, the Hammer of the Witch is trying to come back online, but my Warlock Engineer is diving right in, trying to shut it down. In the meantime, I'm just trying to chase off my opponent's troops. You can see the Censer Bearers are chasing off these Greatswords, and my opponent in general is just kind of having a rough time of it things right now. Over here, Volkmar, of course, is still sticking around. Volkmar, though, on his Pimp Wagon does not have a lot of the best of melee stats. And so while he's great against the squishy lower-end Skaven infantry, he's not really able to deal as well with my sort of monstrous lords here. I do drop a Bless with Filth over here, and it's going to buff some of these units, but the Hell Pit Abomination is also kind of falling low on HP. Definitely not in the best of situations, under 1500 HP, but it does cause poison damage for now. And you can see the Hammer of the Witches is being routed off. My opponent is shooting into my Rat Ogres with his Free Company Militia, which is definitely not great for me. Rat Ogres have atrocious armor, but I'm able to get a beautiful cast over there with Lord Skrulk's Plague Breath, and definitely kind of wipe those guys out. Over here, the monster is slugging it out with Volkmar. It will probably trade pretty effectively because he has atrocious melee stats, as we've discussed before. But unfortunately, it dies almost immediately after engaging him, and so I get some free Skaven Spears just from the birth, but that's just terrible. I'm hitting him with the Libra Bubonicus, which is draining his HP, and at this point my opponent's army is basically fallen apart. Knights of the Blazing Sun are routing over there. Unfortunately, my Sensor Bears, I do believe, actually came back and fought him, slugged it out with him. They were pursuing him. You can see the greatswords of my opponent's army is shattered, but Volkmar is sticking around and actually will stick around for quite a while yet, because I don't have the best of units fighting him. He is unbreakable, of course. He can't really escape. He's too slow at 38 speed at this point, and he doesn't have the best of melee stats, so he's kind of going to get surrounded and beaten down by the Rat Ogres. But he is still healing. He does still have some survivability. He has 100 armor, which makes him pretty tanky against the slings, and a 15% missile resistance. As you can see, we're just kind of going to fast forward here as we pepper down Volkmar on his Volkswagen with Focus Fire, ending with a Pyrrhic victory. So, I definitely think this is a decent Skaven build. The Helping Abomination was more there for fun than anything else. It's not necessarily the best idea in the Empire matchup. I have had, however, success with it in the past. I definitely think the Helping Abomination is not as bad against Empire as most people expect, especially when you support it properly. Because you can, of course, cast your clan rats on the enemy backline to tie down their shooting. You can push through, you can force path through with Plague Priests, and the whole point of this is kind of you oversaturate your opponent's front line with troops. He's not really able to pull anything offline to deal with the back line, and because of that, your Helping Abomination can kind of just run rampage on the back line, dealing with handgunners, that sort of stuff. And it has a lot of HP, so if your opponent decides to focus it out, that's a lot of shooting that's not going into your other troops. Otherwise, it did some okay damage. It obviously died in the end, but it actually gained a Chevron, and that was because it was absolutely whomping on those Knights of the Blazing Sun for quite a bit of that game. And it also did some damage to Volkmar. The Plague Monks traded very effectively. They did surprisingly well against the Greatswords. I was definitely a little impressed by that, and I was kind of surprised. Night Runners, even though they're fairly cheap, did okay. They were helping me debuff enemy troops, that sort of stuff. Plague Monks Sensor Bears are a great unit. Plague Monks and Plague Monks Sensor Bears are really good if you're going against the person who doesn't have magic damage or doesn't have the best of shooting, that sort of stuff. There's a lot of hard counters to Plague Monks, and against a faction like Wood Elves, for example, they can be absolutely terrible. In general, I actually think the Wood Elf versus Skaven matchup is really rough for the Skaven. I think it's pretty favorable to the Wood Elves, but nonetheless, the Plague Monks are indisputably a really powerful unit. They're fairly cheap. They have high model count. They actually don't have the worst HP per model. They have that built-in physical resistance, and they're all in all pretty powerful. And they definitely showed that in this game where they tore through great swords and all that sort of stuff. And I think Plague Monk Sensor Bears really help you bring your line together. Finally, that AoE damage from Skrulk's two lackeys here. The Warlock Engineer is dirt cheap, and I think that's something worth keeping in mind, is that if you just want a free Mortis Engine effect, essentially, then the Warlock Engineer might be the way to go. Because as long as he's in melee, as long as he's not being focused down, especially if you're going against a faction like Empire. Empire's not really that great with hero sniping or lord sniping. He's not a terrible pick. Otherwise, you can bring a Plague Priest and go a little more expensive. And the Plague Priest, because of his abilities, because he does have that breath spell, because he can be decent that way too. And Lord Skrulk is just decent, I think. For my opponent, I don't think this is a bad build. Obviously, my opponent was going for a crusading build. It's pretty clear, I think, just judging by the Knights of the Blazing Sun and the Tattersouls and all that sort of stuff. Hammer of the Witches. So very thematic, very cool build from Iranian here. And it was just fun to play against. Pleasure to play against. So I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about the game or anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comments, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.